Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is Rick Harnish. I'm the Executive Director of the High Speed Rail Alliance, and we really appreciate you joining us. For those who are new to the organization, the High Speed Rail Alliance is member supported. So people like you who want high-speed trains, who want regional trains, who just want to be able to travel without a car, are working towards a new system where we're helping to make that possible for everybody across the country. We believe in an integrated network approach with a mix of much more robust intercity bus service, regional rail on shared use lines, and in important places, the construction of new high-speed lines. So a little bit of housekeeping today. Uh, we will have the presentation, and as we go, if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A button. So questions go into the Q&A button, and then if you would like to use the chat, that's great. But make sure if you want your question to be answered, put it in the Q&A place. For those who aren't members, if you like this program, if you like the idea of being able to take a train on a regular basis, um, please go to highspeedrail.us, go in the right-hand corner and say, become a member. And even if you are a member, if you like this program, do it again. So I'm really excited. First, I want to um, introduce our new manager of outreach engagement. His name is Jordan, and he is on camera today. He will be the one manning the chat and the questions and answers. So welcome on board, Jordan. Looking forward to working for Great Trains together for many years. And then we've got three great speakers to talk about a very important corridor. Arvia Morris is a longtime advocate that we've been talking to for some time. And Tim Gould, working uh, with the Sierra Club, etc. And then Brandon Bowersox with the 350 Seattle aviation team are all here to talk about the Cascades Amtrak route that links Eugene, Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver, British Columbia. So thank you all for joining us, and I will let you all take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Arvia Morris. I'm from Seattle, Washington, and I'm a advocate for rail and getting around without a car. And I'd like to thank High Speed Rail Alliance for the opportunity to share our story from the Pacific Northwest. And my colleagues will introduce themselves as we move through the presentation. Next slide, please. So we're all members of a larger coalition called Rail Can't Wait. And you can see I'm from Climate Rail Alliance, and then Tim is from Rail Passengers Association and Sierra Club, and Brandon from 350 Seattle. And they'll give you more details as we get to their part of the presentation. Next slide, please. So what we'll be talking about today is the Amtrak Cascades route and where it is today and where we would like to see it in the next 10 years. And we'll be talking about our political approach, where we passed a bill in our state legislature to strengthen and put more focus and get the attention of our state transportation authority to put more emphasis and center rail in our transportation policies. Tim will talk about our infrastructure needs, and Brandon will talk about our plans going forward. Next slide, please. So what is the Pacific Northwest? So we're the northwest corner of the country, and the route goes through, it's an international route going into British Columbia. So you can see on the left a slide that has a nice green corridor going through it. That is the location of the rail. That's also the location of most of the population. On either side of that nice green line is blue, and those are mountains. So that really constrains, we're really constrained by geography here in terms of where we can build rail and also where people live. And you'll also notice that there's a lot of water, and that makes the actual land challenging to build things on because we get a lot of rain and we have a lot of bodies of water. So that makes a shifting mix of things to build on. So in any case, we have a growing population. 30% more people moved here between 2000 and 2020. We're expecting 3 to 5 million more people. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of metropolitan areas, and we have a housing crunch. So we have very serious transportation challenges with that many people coming to this area. Our highways are already very congested. They're extremely expensive. All of our transportation budgets are in debt, and highways are dangerous. So people are looking for alternatives. Likewise, our airports are at capacity, and nobody really wants a new international airport in their backyard. And the state commission failed to find a new site for a commercial airport. So we really need more choices. Next slide, please. So we do have a choice, which is the Amtrak Cascades rail service. And you can see on the left that it goes through 18 communities along that corridor where most of the population lives. It currently has 2 trips between Vancouver and Seattle, 6 between Seattle and Portland, 2 between Portland and Eugene, Oregon. We've completely recovered. You can see on the bar graphs, we've completely recovered from the pandemic-induced depression in ridership, and we've even surpassed our pre-pandemic ridership. And that's partly due to an additional train between Seattle and Portland. And who rides this train right now? Oh, so next slide, please. So this train, it's perceived that it's people who just have discretionary travel, meaning it doesn't matter when they arrive anywhere. And you can see that the on-time performance is something that we haven't reached our goal of 88% on-time performance. And this has been true for over a decade. You can see from 2012 to 2024, actually our on-time performance has gotten worse. This really holds back ridership. And there's many people along the corridor who want to use the train, and they do, but it's very frustrating. There's business people, there's families, people who are sending their grandchildren on the train for family visits because we have 18 and under for free, developing a new set of riders. But when they're hours late, it's very frustrating, and people don't want to do that anymore. There's university students. We have University of British Columbia, Western Washington University, Seattle, University of Washington, Tacoma. We have Puget Sound, University of Puget Sound, Portland. We have universities there, and also in Willamette, there's a university in Oregon and University of Oregon in Eugene. So there's college students who want to be able to travel. There's people traveling for medical expenses. There's also many recreationalists who would like to just put their bike on the train and be able to do the recreation that they want. We have 2 state capitals along that route. So there's government workers who also are interested in using the route. But with this kind of poor on-time performance, it really suppresses our ridership. As good as our ridership is today, it could be much better with better on-time performance. We know the public wants this. Next slide, please. So we are in a corridor ID planning process, and this process has identified more round trips. They claim up to 16 daily round trips between Seattle and Portland, and 6 between Vancouver and Seattle, and a forecasted annual ridership 3 times greater than what we have today. This all sounds very good, but the planning document does not have any specific goals for reliability or shorter trip times. And this timeline is for 20 years, and we just can't wait that long. Next slide, please. So this prompted rail advocates to get together with allies and pass some legislation that had real goals so we could have real teeth in our service development plan. And we stated a frequency of 14 round trips between Seattle and Portland, 5 daily trips between Seattle and Vancouver, and more trips between Seattle and Eugene. We state 88% on-time performance. This has been in contracts with stakeholders but never been achieved. And we want to meet those targets by 2035. This legislation also asks for more accountability and more detailed reporting from our Department of Transportation. So on May 19th, 2025, Governor Ferguson signed engrossed Senate House Bill 1837, and we were all very pleased with this result. So this is just a first step. And just to speak a little bit more about how we achieve this, the first thing is to get a legislative champion, which we have in State Senator Rep. Reed. She was very determined about this bill. Most people thought bill would get maybe a hearing and that would be it. But it kept going all the way to the governor's desk. On the left, we have our labor allies, and we also had allies from Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility speaking about the need for people to use trains to get to medical appointments. We had other legislators who supported Representative Reed. We also had a large group of different environmental grassroots groups. So we had a tremendous reach into the constituents throughout the state based on this coalition. And we also had a tremendous amount of technical expertise. So we had a lot of confidence. We knew that this plan, what our goals are feasible. And Tom White, who's also pictured here next to the governor on the right-hand side, is our technical expert. Next slide, please. So we also reached out to planning organizations. This is really important. They do have a lot of weight in planning transportation. The Puget Sound Regional Council, which includes the counties that are the most populous in the state, and they basically agreed with us that the service development plan needed to have stronger goals, and we needed to really be looking at mode shift to rail. We also tried to get as many letters to the editor published as we could to generate that popular interest. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'll turn this over to my colleague Tim, who will speak about how we're going to get this done. The legislation is the first step. Thank you.
Thank you, Arvia, for that overview of the current situation. Again, my name's Tim Gould. My affiliations are for identification purposes only. I am a volunteer leader for both Rail Passengers Association and Sierra Club. My remarks today are really based on work that I've involved in with the Rail Can't Wait campaign, the grassroots organization that is really responsible for getting 1837 passed. So with that passed, now really we come to a point of how do we actually achieve the vision and the objectives that have been set out in 1837. Next. So currently there are projects underway that our rail department in WSDOT, that's the Washington State Department of Transportation, is overseeing. But we really need a lot more upgrades. Currently there's on the order of about $435 million worth of projects, the largest of which is a upgrade to the new Seattle maintenance facility for around $300 million. Also, some other projects just noted here about rehabilitating a key drawbridge along the route, and also some important landslide mitigation work. But all of that is really the kind of things that will just maintain the existing system. And the opportunity that we have now with 1837 having been passed, but also clearly a very big challenge, is we need to be able to convince decision makers that much larger rail investments are worthwhile, and that this is what we need to do in order to get to that more frequent, more reliable service that we're looking for. Next. So with the corridor ID planning and the service development plan work, this is going to provide us with the blueprint for future improvements. And it's really important to make sure that as this document goes from preliminary to final, that we have a very ambitious set of capital improvement projects that will provide the kind of public benefits that we're looking for. The preliminary document published last year had several different alternatives. We certainly like the greater frequency, but we're going to have much better infrastructure to be able to support that and deliver the on-time performance we're looking for. Next. What we're really looking for is simply a mode shift to rail. This is something that's extremely urgent. We have a growing population in the area. It's very key that we address climate mitigation, and one very excellent way of doing that is utilizing the inherent energy efficiency of rail transport. Also, rail delivers a lot of safety, health, and environmental advantages compared with constrained highways and airports. Transportation makes up roughly about 45% of all greenhouse gas emissions in the state. And again, that high energy efficiency equates to less pollution, less greenhouse gas climate impact. Also, when we serve both small and large communities, it helps to promote smart growth. State of Washington is very serious about our Growth Management Act and making sure that communities grow in a way that is sustainable and does not sprawl. And also, it's important along the Amtrak Cascades corridor because all of those station stops tend to be places where there are linkages to our local transit. And this is the kind of accessibility and mobility that the service can deliver. Next. More frequency is going to drive greater ridership. This is something that we've seen based on data across a number of different state-supported services. And what we want is not just greater frequency, but reliable frequency and shorter trip time with frequency. That would allow the Cascade service to effectively move up this curve shown in the graph, and we could actually be experiencing much higher ridership than just simply a linear increase. Next. So having better Amtrak Cascades delivers many different benefits to all different kinds of stakeholders. Again, the trains will use only about a third of the energy of automobile or other vehicular transport. If we have frequent and convenient schedules, that provides people with a lot more options for traveling. The faster travel times would be competitive with driving and with short-haul flights. And also, improvements to this corridor not only delivers affordable and equitable transportation to passengers, but it also is synergistic with ensuring that freight movement has proper capacity. We can reduce conflicts with passenger trains and freight trains. And this is very important because the Northwest is a highly trade-dependent area. Next. So how do we get to this kind of future with greater frequency and reliability? What we really need is additional track that is constructed specifically for passenger service. Next. Adding more track to the existing right-of-way is the most effective way to increase our capacity and deliver on this promise of more reliable service. Advocates call for adding up to 200 miles, actually, of higher speed passenger track, putting in passenger dedicated track, I believe it would be called Class 6, that would support high speeds of up to 110 miles per hour. This would reduce the travel times and ensure that we would have on-time performance, and that's the sort of thing that drives ridership. Next. With the additional track for passenger-specific service, as shown in this diagram at the top, you add that into the existing right-of-way, And this not only is going to be a big improvement for passenger service, but it also increases the capacity for freight. So the host railroad, much of it along this corridor, BNSF, would stand to benefit as well, in addition to improving the Amtrak Cascades. The crossover switch in the photo at the bottom of this image is an example of the kind of flexibility that additional improvements in the infrastructure can provide. Next. In addition to adding passenger track, we also call for some specific instances of straightening or reducing curves. This is a way of being able to upgrade some of the slowest sections of the current corridor. In this one instance, this would be some new alignment along the Point Defiance bypass close to where the corridor crosses the Nisqually River. This could allow us to replace some of the slowest and worst bottlenecks of the route with new track that would allow for much higher speeds, and it would get rid of those particular bottlenecks. Next. This particular image just shows that example in the Nisqually area at the Point Defiance bypass. The green line would be some new routing that would tie in to the third track that we're calling for further south in this route. Next. So improving the frequency and improving the speed of travel, this would allow for much greater frequency of service and to have it be reliable. We know how to do this. Between the Amtrak Cascades long-range plan, which doesn't certainly need cost estimate updating, but the approach that it uses of looking at ways to relieve bottlenecks, increase capacity, increase speed. These are the sorts of things that we have plenty of good examples of how to get this done. This can allow us to reach the maximum increase frequency called for in the preliminary service development plan, the 16 Seattle-Portland one-way trips and the 6 Seattle-Vancouver BC trips, but to do this with much faster service. And it really becomes a matter of how we get the decision makers to prioritize this and deliver the resources. Next. So knowing that there is a way forward, now we need to be able to get there. And with that, I'll turn it to Brandon. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So my name's Brandon Bowersox-Johnson. I am from 350 Seattle and got into this work actually by working on aviation issues. And when learning about sort of how constrained our aviation system is, realizing rail is a great win-win solution. And I'll explain a little about that in a minute. But basically, just to sort of frame where we are here, Arvia explained and showed like we have a great train service now, the Amtrak Cascades, but it has these critical like Achilles heel of on-time performance. And so we built this multi-stakeholder coalition with labor allies, with climate allies, with transit and rail advocates, to really help pass legislation to really be more forward-thinking in our rail planning to improve this. And Tim explained the nuts and bolts, and Tim, I think you just said, like, we know how to do this. And that's exactly right. We know how to do this. So I wanted to just share a couple last thoughts here on how we make this real and where we go from here. And then we'll open it up to Q&A, and really excited to hear your questions as well. So one immediate next step is the new train sets called Arrow. These are coming to passenger service on the Amtrak Cascades in 2026. And thanks to our DOT and to trains.com for some of these great photos here. They're lovely trains. I've heard the seats are very comfortable. You may be seeing them in your neck of the woods. They're already, they've moved to Colorado for testing. I think they're headed to the Northeast Corridor for some more testing there. And so watch for these. And they'll go into passenger use next year. They're capable of 125 miles an hour. And so we really want these great trains on better infrastructure, better rails and tracks to have faster service and really take advantage of it here along the corridor. So how do we keep building momentum? Well, for one thing, we will be continuing to engage with state legislators and decision makers. The kind of legislative agenda we'll be watching as we go into the session starts here in January is how that bill that Arvia explained, how that bill gets implemented, and those annual reports about, okay, if we aren't improving our on time and getting to those goals, what are we going to do to fix it, and what does it take? We'll also be looking to really continue to push for more funding for our rail program, especially the dedicated passenger track that Tim explained is really critical to get faster trip times, more reliable service, and to solve those freight and passenger bottlenecks. We also are advocating for a policy of sort of beefing up and having a dedicated rail office with more staff inside our DOT. We could talk about that during Q&A for sure. And there are other things happening here in our region that we're tracking and supporting. East-west service improvements, electrifying these lines so that we can get rid of the kind of the diesel pollution and make travel by train even lower carbon. It's already way better than going by car or by an airplane, but we could electrify and really solve some more of that pollution for the trackside communities. There are some short line improvements to help move wheat. There's some job training we're advocating for. And so those are specific things, but I think the bigger picture for us at the state level about making an impact is to keep growing that alliance that Arvia talked about with labor, with environmental groups, with transit supporters, with rail users, with businesses, and keep growing the people who, when they hear about this, they say, well, yeah, I want better trains. And if I can get them within this, decade, let's do it. And also to look at the models that have worked in other states to fund that. We know it takes the infrastructure Tim talked about, but things like in Oregon, there's a tax on rubber tires because part of the rubber in tires is actually what kills juvenile salmon and is hurting our salmon and our orca populations here. We're looking at the Virginia model for how the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority really governs and builds. And also here in Washington, we have a cap and trade or a carbon cap and invest law. And so there's revenue that can go into decarbonizing transportation there. So lots of things we're watching for on the state to keep that vision of better rail, driving our transportation policy. Also, I said I'd quickly mention aviation, how we got into this because of the climate challenges and the environmental justice and health challenges for people who live near airports or under flight paths. So here in Seattle, aviation is already 27% of our city of Seattle's greenhouse gas emissions, according to the city's own inventory. And that is growing fast. In fact, in the latest inventory, the jet fuel pollution is bigger now than the gasoline pollution because we're switching to EVs. The gasoline part of our greenhouse gas emissions is decreasing, but the jet fuel part from the amount we are flying is increasing faster than that. So it has now overtaken our transportation emissions budget, and it keeps growing quickly, as some of these stats on the screen show. And we're investing huge in it, spending $5 billion for construction projects that are currently underway and in planning to accommodate way more flights and way more passengers over the coming decade. So, but it's a constrained airspace, as Arvia said, and we're really nearing our capacity here. So the win-win solution is rail, because 20% of the flights out of SeaTac Airport are actually short-haul flights. Guess what the #1 international destination you can fly from here is? It's not some amazing place in Asia. The #1 international destination from Seattle is Vancouver, BC, which is on the train line and already served by the Great Cascades service. So if we can make that faster and make it on time, how much of that travel can we give people a better option by rail to take and free up some of that congestion on our highways and the congestion at our airports and our airspace. So it's a win-win solution that also is faster, cheaper, and solves some climate challenges for us. One other very unique piece to the Pacific Northwest puzzle that I just want to mention is we actually are part of 2 corridor ID projects along the same corridor. So that Vancouver BC to Seattle to Portland, Oregon corridor is part of this Amtrak Cascades corridor ID project that we've been talking about today, but also planning is underway for ultra high-speed rail along the same corridor. And both corridor ID projects are moving on parallel tracks with some different timelines. And so I'll explain. They're very different projects. As Tim showed, really with the details, the Amtrak Cascades project is really about like adding dedicated passenger track and improving service in the existing right-of-way. And so those improvements have pretty minimal need for new right-of-way or eminent domain, and pretty minimal, there's already EISs that have been done. A lot of these improvements are sort of shovel-ready to add dedicated passenger track in an existing right-of-way. And so it looks a lot like the picture here on the left, which is from the Virginia High-Speed Rail Authority. On the right-hand side of the screen, the ultra high-speed rail project is in planning and in study. There's not a route selected yet. So it would be a lot more like this picture here from the California High-Speed Rail Authority, like finding new right-of-way, building new tracks and a new route when a route is chosen. And it would get even faster service than what could be achieved by improving the Amtrak Cascades. So there is an incremental benefit there. Both are exciting. I would love to ride on either service. And I also want to point out a bit of the difference in their timeline and their price tag. So these numbers come from our Joint Transportation Committee of our legislature, had an independent study done of the ultra high-speed rail project and their planning numbers for Cascades. And you see that the price tag, the Cascades improvements are maybe a tenth or 10 to 15% of the price of the high-speed rail route. And the timeline for these Cascades improvements is like 5 to 10 years, whereas the high-speed rail route is going to take a few decades for the kind of siting, planning, building. And so they're on very different tracks, but they are both mutually interdependent. Someday this region may have both. I want to highlight a few other differences here. The Cascades route, improvements there would serve the 18 cities and also untangle the freight congestion, as Tim and Arvia spoke to. The ultra high-speed rail route would really have, the plan is 3 stops in the big metro areas and deliver faster service just between those to solve passenger bottlenecks. So our take on this is that these are very different. They're on different tracks. Someday our region may have both. As we see in other countries that have high-speed rail, they started by improving their intercity rail a lot, before building the high-speed routes. And here we want to build a culture shift of passenger rail, of ridership, of people supporting trains. And so our belief is to really keep advocating for solving these Amtrak Cascades bottlenecks right now in the near term to deliver better train service in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, on a timeline that helps with the climate crisis and helps with our population growth and builds that next generation of rail riders that will be excited to hop on higher speed service when it exists. And so mode shift is something we think we can all work together for in how our transportation dollars get spent. And it's going to take a big coalition, as Arvia said, to keep making a difference. So glad to talk more about that in the Q&A as well. One last comment here, we're also looking to the federal situation, as many of you probably are. The surface transportation reauthorization is big. We obviously need to keep advocating for rail there. It's a bipartisan solution that creates jobs, economic advantage, connects our rural and urban America. And so hopefully that can be a big piece, and funding for things like FRA grant dollars and CRISI grants, is something we want to see more of in the next transportation bill. We're watching this merger situation and any impacts on passenger service. And we're also watching these pieces of legislation, the All Aboard Act and the Reliable Rail Service Act, which is a bipartisan bill that could help solve this common carrier obligation, the kind of the passenger freight congestion issues, and help continue improving our rail system. So it's exciting times that we live in here. One other thing I'll briefly mention, here's some contact info. You can take a picture and use any of these QR codes or links to get to Climate Rail Alliance's info, or Solutionary Rail is another one of the groups in our coalition. And Solutionary Rail has just this year launched an exciting podcast called Reconnect America that we urge you all to tune in for, that really unpacks some of the policy issues of how to really make our freight and our passenger systems work better together, and how to get to that sort of visionary, well-functioning rail solutions across our country that we all want. And so here's our contact info as well. Feel free to take a picture of this and reach out to any of us. We're glad to stay in touch after today. We're really glad to have been able to present. And with that, the rest of our time here is really Q&A. So Jordan, we're curious to see what questions have been rolling in and what else we can talk about today.
Well, Brandon, thank you. I get, as the host, I get to ask the first question. I'm really thrilled with this presentation. We've been struggling over the last couple of weeks to start language on how to create a legislation on a rail plan in Illinois. And I had forgotten that you guys had done this, so I'm excited to see that again and dig more into what that bill is and how it might apply here. But as the High Speed Rail Alliance, um, I've wrestled with this challenge of there are definitely two different camps, right? There are people who are like, fix what we have, and there are people who are, we need high speed rail, and the two very infrequently come together, and I've found that frustrating for decades. I was in Elyria a couple of weeks ago and saw the space for two. You could put two dedicated passenger main lines in where there used to be New York Central main lines between Chicago and New York, and Elyria could have half-hour service if there's hourly service from Cleveland to Detroit and hourly service from Cleveland to Chicago. But so you've actually got this circumstance in Washington where there are two projects that actually, as I understand, have different departments that are very separate from each other. Is that correct? The DOT structure is very separate, right?
Well, I'll start and other people can fill in. It's somewhat opaque to us. They're all in Washington Department of Transportation, but there's one section where Amtrak Cascades resides, which is the Rail, Freight, and Ports Division. So, and that's probably because the passenger rail is using the freight lines. Then there's this mega project section, which is where the ultra high speed rail project resides, and they're calling that developing the I-5 corridor. So it's lumped in with big projects that are going to improve the I-5 corridor.
Oh, so I've been very frustrated again because the secretary is talking about how high-speed rail would be less than half the cost of a new lane on I-5. But I have the impression that doesn't mean they've abandoned the idea of adding a new lane on I-5. Is that also true?
I don't know.
Okay.
It's
Paul, would like to
many,
comment?
yeah, many parts of the I-5 corridor, it would be extremely challenging to add additional lanes just on account of constraints in urban areas. There would be perhaps eminent domain property acquisition necessary, or you have situations, just the topography or the hydrology makes it very, very challenging. But yeah, those two programs are have different they're separately identified as different programs under Federal Railroad Administration's Corridor ID program.
And
So, yeah, Brandon.
yeah, I mean, I'll just add, that I think we have to bust down some of those silos a bit inside our DOT and also outside our DOT. And the groups that are excited about high-speed rail and transit, and the groups that are excited about fixing what we have, like all of us, I think, need to work together for mode shift and for how we prioritize our transportation dollars. And I would add, you asked, should we fix it first or should we build something new? In my mind, both. And when the current system falls below 50% on time performance, well, then it's time to start fixing. Like, we better figure out what's broken. It worked, a decade or so ago. We got to get it working again. And we have to build a culture of rail ridership and people who can count on getting on the train to get to a doctor's appointment or a job interview, so that we have a generation of people who trust and use the system and are ready and excited when we're ready to finally connect up the high-speed line and get even better service here in the future. So I think it's about bringing people together, including the kind of labor, environmental, big coalitions of folks who want to keep seeing momentum and to improve the rail service of all kinds.
Yeah, I want to be clear. I'm not asking that question. I think as you guys have said multiple times in this presentation, we can't wait to get people on trains. We need to do both at the same time. I'm struggling with how do we get the two working together so that you go, oh, if we do this tunnel first in the high-speed rail project, then it helps the whole system, right? Instead of saying, well, this is a completely separate thing that's related to the highway. No, this is part of the railway network, and this tunnel here or this tunnel here will help the whole system, and then you keep adding out from there. But I don't know how you get there. So, but I am thrilled that you guys got this legislation passed and that you've been focused on this effort.
Yeah, one of the other things I think we need to realize about the ultra high speed project is that the Northwest right now is about where California was 20 to 25 years ago with getting its program off the ground and started. And so even if we can have a better delivery record than what California has shown so far, it's still multiple decades before there would be service running, and that's why we really need to have, I think, a renewed focus on improving Amtrak Cascades. It's sort of been the neglected stepchild for too long of all the various transportation options, and it needs to be brought to the forefront and deliver on the kind of promise that is reflected in the 1837 legislation.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, that voters approved in 1990 a very big bonding program to expand passenger rail and transit all across California. So that project ramped up very quickly and is why we have the Surfliners, the Capitol Corridor, and the San Joaquin Corridor actually function, as opposed to other corridors around the country. And then they also started high-speed rail planning in about 1990. And unfortunately, they haven't funded either enough, but they're certainly very far the cleanest shirt in the very dirty laundry of our state highway programs. So enough of my pontificating. Jordan, do we have anything? What have we got from the audience?
We have a lot of great questions, which I'm sad to say we will not be able to get around to all of them this session, but we have a few questions about the interstate partnership with the state of Oregon. Andrew asks, is there a related effort in Oregon to improve service south of Portland, or is that a gap that needs to be filled?
I'll take that first. Actually, the state of Oregon, in some ways, is ahead of Washington with its service development plan for the Portland Eugene part of the corridor. Um, they actually are further along in their planning process. Once Washington completes its final service development plan, then the two of them will be merged, and then the two states together would go to FRA to then start applying for specific grants and making improvements.
Thank you. And piggybacking off of that, Doug asks, who is officially or who has officially represented the state of Oregon in the CID process for this project? If you can speak to that.
I'm not sure how those relationships are happening. Washington, so much of the track is in Washington that I'm guessing that Washington is sort of leading the conversation, but there is a lot of interest in the legislature in Oregon.
And also, there is a section within Oregon Department of Transportation that specifically deals with Amtrak Cascades. I've been able to hear some of the staff members give reports on some of their ongoing efforts. Unfortunately, I don't recall specific staff member names, but they do have dedicated staff who are working on this.
And just one quick addition. This is partly why all these sort of silos and the different state DOTs that are in charge of different segments, it's kind of a state-supported route by Washington here and a state-supported route by Oregon down there. This is partly what gets us thinking about more of a regional transit benefit district or governance or regional rail authority approach to really get the province, BC, and the states, everyone along this route around the same table, thinking in a visionary way about how to connect all those dots. So that's something, long-term we'll continue working for.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Kevin Jones asks a great question for us advocates. What was key to getting a legislative champion for HB 1837?
Well, what was really great is over the years we've developed some pretty close relationships with our representatives, and it was recommended to us by one representative that a policy bill would be a good idea to get some focus on this. And then we took that to the chairs of the transportation committee and got the support of in the state house. And then we went to the vice chair who I'd gotten to know a little bit, and I knew she was a really strong transportation supporter. So given that the path had been cleared a little bit for a policy bill and that leadership was open to it, she was just an amazing champion and was willing to take it on. And so that was really, really exciting to get her sponsorship and absolutely key. And then our network is pretty big. so that was another really important piece. And then having the allies.
Yeah.
But having those relationships, just to get that sponsor, you need to talk to the representatives. You need to meet with them in person. You need to go to their town halls. Even if they're not talking about your topic, you just go, you get to know them and find out what's interesting for them. And then when the opportunity comes up, you're like, hey, you're interested in this, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'd add, like, yeah, talk to every one of the, the representatives and senators who's along the routes, who has stations in their district, people who ride in their district. And we were talking to folks of both parties at all times. And there's interest on both sides of the aisle. So talk to everybody who will listen and keep those conversations going. And ultimately, it shook out that this one legislator, because she was new joining the Transportation Committee this session, this past year, she was a great person to do it because she was sort of new on the scene. Like, hey, I have this idea. I want to spend a little time on, let's look at this train. It's not on time. And how can we get it back to being on time like it used to be? How can we make it better? So she, as a fresh voice, was just a perfect person to lead it. So I'd say talk to everyone who will listen and, find those legislators who might be great champions like she was.
And that's Representative Julia Reed from Seattle.
Got it. Thank you so much. We have had a lot of questions about electrification. And, obviously the current plan is to upgrade the current right of way. The Aero train sets are on their way and they're going to be diesel, but there are those plans in the future, hopefully to upgrade to full electrification. Can you all talk a little bit more about the road to how we get there from your neck of the woods?
Tim?
Yeah, it is a longer term thing. I mean, when you look at the scale and the different challenges involved here, I think we need to prioritize mode shift to rail with the most efficient diesel locomotives running along the corridor that we can get, and with the new Siemens Aero train sets, that's something that we'll have. But yeah, I mean, electrification still needs to be the longer term objective, and one good way of starting this would be to have this be part of the transportation electrification strategy that the state is pursuing. You look at some of the documents that they have so far, and it really is just focused on EVs, and we really need to include electrification of main rail corridors as part of that. And then, I think another key, again, it's just like looking for opportunities that would kind of lay the foundation for doing this, in terms of the infrastructure, of planning for things like transmission line corridors. Some of the railroad corridors would also make very good long distance transmission corridors for electric energy. And then there'd be the opportunity to put in substations and have the necessary step down to be able to operate the trains. But these kinds of planning efforts, again, it's more of that breaking down some of the silos that Brandon mentioned that is needed in this case, and then also continuing to point out how other parts of the world do this routinely. We hear a lot from Class 1 railroads that electrification just won't work, or it is simply not economic. But when you look around the world, much of the main railroad infrastructure is electrified, and so I think we need to continue that conversation with the Class 1 railroads, with electric utilities, and keep looking for opportunities to advance that. But realizing that it is going to be somewhat of a long road to get there.
And I'll just add on electrification, it is one of the things that's super exciting and motivates a lot of the climate and environmental kind of part of our coalition, the fact that rail could be electrified, and that we can solve that environmental justice, health justice issue of the trackside communities. The other critical thing here is we actually, in terms of breaking down silos, have to talk about electrifying the freight, right? The line for Cascades is a line with a ton of freight. We get the ports of Vancouver, BC, and the port here at Seattle and in Tacoma are the biggest ports on the west coast of this continent, other than Los Angeles. And there's a huge amount of our trade economy here that's coming in off boats, off the ocean, and onto trucks and rail lines and containers. And so we really need a strategy. Could be that it starts with segments, discontinuous electrification, but it really has to be a freight and passenger electrification strategy here. And it has huge potential to clean up those, those dirty diesel locomotive, emissions for the communities that live right by tracks. Of course, it's still way better already to take a train, like the new Aero trains, than it is to drive or to fly in terms of pollution. So as Tim said, it's incremental, but I think here it's got to be breaking down the freight and passenger silo to really electrify the routes and get the freight moving on electrified trains here over time, like other countries have done.
I'm not very knowledgeable on this, but I will say that I think that we have some efforts going to do electrification at our ports, and we've actually gotten some funding for that, and that helps with communities that live near the ports to have electrification of some of the equipment that moves merchandise around the port. I believe those are accurate statements.
Yeah, and certainly electrifying rail yards, and many of those are adjacent to ports. That could be the way to start before then doing the more capital intensive investments of the long stretches of running route.
Great. Thank you very much. We all okay if we go over a few minutes? I know some of you had hard stops, but we have a few more. I think we can do a couple more questions here. Jacob asks, what is the impact of high-speed rail on wildlife corridors? And I'm going to piggyback off of that question to ask you all for this particular project, if you could shed a little light on what the, because we're talking about the Pacific Northwest and adding an additional right of way, what the environmental study and environmental considerations have to be done in order to do a larger infrastructural project like this, and sort of what you have come across during this planning phase.
Well, certainly the environmental review will be very important to assess how to mitigate the impacts. Especially something like a high-speed rail line. It would very likely it would need to be treated in a similar fashion as an I-5, where the entire corridor essentially is all fenced off. And then we should also be thinking in terms of having wildlife underpasses and overpasses. Obviously, the need for that might not be quite as critical in this north-south corridor that has so much population as compared, say, to an east-west corridor that would go through the mountains, where you need much more wildlife passage. But already there are some studies underway, even looking at putting in wildlife crossings of I-5 in the southwest part of the state of Washington. It essentially would allow for some wildlife connectivity between the Willapa Hills to the west and the Southern Cascades to the east.
I've seen some of those wildlife bridges that they are implementing for the Rail Baltica project in Europe, which is really great. Speaking of funding, Adonis asks, what are avenues where we can seek funding for rail projects such as this outside of the Fed for adding tracks? Can we do private-public partnerships? And are there any specific to this project that you're able to share?
I would say we're not able to share.
Fair enough.
We're bringing up the subject of funding with our legislators for this next legislative session, and we have provided a list of ideas, but we're not sure which ones will have traction. And so fortunately, we have a list of ideas, so we can
Great.
start shopping things around. And I think that's where you have to start. And then also looking at Virginia, because they do have dedicated funding. And I think having that dedicated funding source really helps rail projects, because often it's intermittent funding. So it's stop, start, stop, start. It's not, there's no real commitment to it. And then, when I've talked to the people from the Washington State Department of Transportation, and they say, well, oh yes, Amtrak, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. And it's because of the funding. There's no consistent funding, so there's no consistency to it. But if you had that consistency and it was considered an essential part of the transportation in the region, then you wouldn't have these stops and start. I mean, we have continuous highway development. We have continuous growth of airports. So we need, because it's continuously funded and considered essential. So we need to have that same kind of approach to rail, I think.
Yeah, also the Climate Commitment Act, that's our Cap and Invest program that Brandon had mentioned. The revenue from that is something that could be a source for some state support of this. But the magnitude of all of this is such that while we can look at public-private partnerships, I think we also really need to keep pressing for additional federal match funding. I mean, a lot of what we've been talking about, we're kind of thinking in terms of, if we can just get a 20% state match to be able to leverage an 80% federal grant, then there's an avenue to move these projects forward. And certainly, maybe some of this we basically kind of get everything lined up so that maybe in 2029 we'll be ready to get some federal money and move things forward. But there's a lot that we can do to get everything ready before then.
Great. Thank you.
I think we've hit our time. So
Yeah.
thank you, Jordan, for your first round at questions and answers. That was very good. Thank you to the audience. Again, if you like these programs, if you want to see great trains across the country, please go to highspeedrail.us, and hit that Become a Member button. We really appreciate you coming. And Arvia, Brandon, and Tim, boy, I really appreciate this presentation, and looking forward to working with you guys on reauthorization of the federal rail program, as that's technically due to be done in 26, though we know that it will probably be extended. But the discussion is happening right now. So again, thank you to everybody, and I look forward to having continued conversations with you all.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Talk to you later.